we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, Doctor.
Thank you. It always sounds so formal when someone calls me by my title. Welcome, everybody. Really good to be here. Can I just, a quick show of hands, who here is from South Africa? So how would you like me to greet you? Sawubona, Sanibona, Dumelang, Goeienaand. How's it? All right, and the rest of you, I'll just go with good evening. Kia ora. It's a privilege to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Richard. We've been talking for a long time, and I've been looking forward to this. We wanted to do this last year, but then we had COVID, and well, such is life, eh? Carries on. So I've got about, I think, an hour and a half to share a couple of thoughts with you. I've been doing research on stress and resilience for over 20 years. And it's a passion, really big passion of mine. And the reason why it's a passion is I'm passionate about seeing people achieve their best potential, the best performance, just be as good as they possibly can be. And so one of the things I saw that stands in the way of people is this thing called stress. So I became interested in stress. So the passion is helping people to be the best they can be, and the interest is stress. And so through that, I eventually studied biochemistry, I studied microbiology, I also studied psychology, did a lot of research around neuroscience, how the brain works and what happens in the body during stress. So I'm going to try and explain over 20 years worth of research to you in an hour and a half. So it's going to be pretty quick. The other good news is, though, that I am completely interruptible. So if you didn't hear something, if my accent's weird, if there's something you want to ask me, just raise your hand or shout out, and I'll answer that question. But if I think it's going to take too long to answer it, I'm going to stick around. Apparently there's coffee or something around here, or a little area at the back. So afterwards, feel free to come and have a chat with me. And if you miss me then, feel free to send me a message on social media, because that's what we do these days. We're on social media. You don't need my email address. You can just stalk me on social media and send a message, and I'll respond to that as quickly as possible. All right. So I know it's a sensitive topic for many people. I'm not going to go too much into the mental health side of things, but I'm going to talk about stress and some general stuff. I'm first going to tell you all about stress and where it comes from and kind of define stress, and I'm going to talk about coping strategies and what I've seen over the years work. So when I say coping strategies, it's in part my own research, it's in part other people's research, but it's also things that I've seen that happened over years and years and years of other people writing about the difficulties that they've experienced in life. I also need to add in here that I've researched a lot of people. So every year I interact with, I don't know, anything between 20 and 30,000 people. And from all of those people, I take the general themes that come out of there, and there are some common themes of what people do who cope with things really well. And then there's some other things that people do and don't do where they don't cope very well. So I'm going to give you a summary of all of that very quickly tonight. And of course, there's a lot more, but let's see how fast we can get through this, right? Y'all ready for that? I know we've all had a nice meal, by the way. And you know what happens when you had a meal? It pulls your stomach down and all the other skin pulls down as well, including your eyelids. So if you want to catch a nap while I speak, feel free. I think this is going to be recorded as well, so you can listen to it afterwards. Pretend to be here, and then listen to it afterwards. I often have this with students, right? So students, when we teach them statistics, so one of the courses I teach is statistics. It's an incredibly exhilarating course. For any of you who have never studied statistics, people love it. So you can imagine you've got 250 students sitting in front of you after lunch. So what they do in the mornings is they drink V, or whatever energy drink, and by afternoon they all crash. So at first I was teaching these students and I thought, man, they're smart. They agree with everything I say, because I couldn't see that. But they sort of just nod off every now and again. So they're actually falling asleep, right? So I'll assume that you're agreeing with everything I say tonight. So if I say, can I have a participant, and you nod, you're going to be the participant, right? Cool. Can I get the first slide up? Right, so you'll see there's some social media icons. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn as well. So feel free to connect there. I always thought Instagram is an instant dieting fad, losing a gram instantly, but apparently it's not. And students didn't like me saying that. So let's drop to the next slide. And I'm going to introduce my family quickly to you. So I'm married to Frederica. We've been married for a whole number of years. I think it's about 15 years. We started our family quite late. So Ziva is now 7. Anya is 6 and Joel is 5. So if you do the math, at some stage, all of them were under 2.5 years old. I don't remember anything of the 2.5 years at all. It's just a big blur. So they're all going to the same school. Joel's going to school this year, so we're excited about that because Mum can have some free time to herself. Right, next one, let's go. So what I want you to remember is I'm going to talk a whole lot of things about science as well tonight. There's going to be quite a bit about science. I'm going to explain it in a way that makes sense, hopefully. But I want you to remember this verse here because I think this is really important. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, and I know that full well. So as a scientist, when I study science, I'm studying the creation, and it gives me an opportunity to study creation in a way that just helps me to understand how it all fits together. So I'm amazed. So imagine studying biochemistry, and you understand chemistry at the smallest level of life. And it is just amazing how all of these things work together. That's a completely different topic as well. But I'm just amazed by how things work, how everything was created. So it fascinates me. Next one, please. So just click through them until you get to the last lot. There we go. So when we talk about science, obviously what you hear is a lot of science, and people talk a lot about science, and they try to use the scientific explanation for every single thing that there is. The fact of the matter is science must be based on philosophy. Philosophy must be based on logic. Logic must be based on wisdom. And so the question we always ask is, then where does the wisdom come from? And from a biblical perspective, it's always been very clear that wisdom is from the Lord. So I want you to think about this. When we talk about science, all we're talking about is the superficial top part of what we understand about life. We're not understanding anything about philosophy or logic or wisdom. Science doesn't lead to wisdom. Next thing I want you to quickly look at is on the next slide. All the way down. So, previous one. So scientific reasoning is what I see in a lot of scientific magazines these days. They try to use scientific explanation for everything. People are trying to explain that you can use science to make moral decisions. I mean, you can't. And it's unbelievable how they think. So I sit on a whole bunch of research ethics committees, and the fact of the matter is, for us to do research, scientific research, we need to get ethics clearance. So you can't say that you use science to give you an ethical decision framework if you need to use the ethics to come up with a scientific research project, right? So it doesn't work like that. So scientific reason is based on legal reasoning, is based on ethical reasoning, and it must be based on moral reasoning. So that's just a quick positioning for you to understand how my head works and how I look at scientific explanations in terms of stress and resilience and the research that I do as well. All right? And by the way, feel free to take photos of the slides. They are there purely for you to take notes. So you don't have to write anything down. I've done the writing down for you. You just take a photo. It's easy as that. Next one, please. So here we go. I'm going to ask a couple of questions tonight. One of the questions is, how many of you have heard the terms good stress and bad stress? Have you heard the word good stress and bad stress? Yeah? Next question is, how many of you have been stressed in the last year? How about the last 6 months? All right, how about the last sort of 3 months? Gee, I've come to the right place. How about the last sort of 2 weeks? Okay, so how many, if you think about the most stressful day that you've had in the last year, how many of you would love to have the day over again? No? All right? So I think I ask that question of many audiences every year, and usually there's about 1 or 2 people per year who say, I'd like to have the day over again. And if I ask them why, they say, so that I can do things over and better the next time, right? But if you ask them if they just want the day over, everybody says, nah, not a chance. So then my follow-up question is, so where does this good stress thing then come from? Why do people talk about good stress and bad stress if nobody can give me an example of good stress? So I started getting skeptical about this when I was still at university. So before I even started doing the research, I was very skeptical about this idea of good stress, because I've never heard an example of good stress. So for example, when last did you open up the newspaper, for those who read the newspaper, and you go, Jacinda says the New Zealand economy is doing exceedingly well because of all the stressed people in New Zealand. Have you ever seen that? When last did you open up a company report and it says, thank you very much to our staff for being so stressed. That's why we're doing so well. Like, have you ever read that? No. So I don't know where this good stress idea comes from. So next slide, please. And so what you often see is this graph. I don't know, have any of you studied psychology? Yeah, have any of you studied organizational behavior or management of any kind? So if you have, you might remember having seen this sort of graph in those management textbooks as well. And basically what it says is performance is on this side, and as stress decreases, performance goes down, and as stress increases, you get this thing called good stress, eustress, and then eventually when it gets too much, then performance goes down and you get burnout. So on that graph, what you also see is burnout on the one side and depression on the other side. So when I saw this graph, as an innocent student at university, I put my hand up and I said, so if I interpret this graph correctly, it means that if somebody is depressed, you should give them more stress so that they perform better. Yeah, that's what it means. I mean, that's exactly what it says. Do you think the professor liked that question? Nah. So we had a what would we call it? A robust academic conversation. and he knew my surname after that. Every class he would just pick on me. So he knew me after that. So we had a conversation. So let's go to the next slide. Now, I'm going to give you all the negative news first. So when you look at stress, so if we say, well, stress is no good, there's nothing good about stress, right? There is no such thing as good stress. It doesn't exist. I've never seen it. What we've got to do is we've got to define it. There's a difference between pressure and stress. And what I'm going to tell you tonight is what is stress. So pressure is the daily demands. You've got to get up in the morning, you've got to go to work, you've got to write a report, you've got to get things done. That's just pressure. That's not stress. It's just stuff we've got to do. So what I'm going to explain tonight to you is maybe help to define the difference between pressure and then what stress really is. So if we look at what stress really is, not pressure, but actual stress, there's a psychological and a physical impact. All the research I've looked at says that stress predicts 75 to 90% of all psychological and physical illnesses. I'll repeat that. Stress predicts 75 to 90% of all psychological and physical illnesses. That's a big number. It doesn't mean that it causes it. It just means that it is the catalyst. It's the thing that makes people, it doesn't make you sick. So a virus makes you sick, right? If you get a virus, makes you sick. But a virus makes you sick when your immune system is suppressed. Stress is the reason for the immune system being suppressed, right? So stress is linked to all of these. I remember a couple of years ago, a pastor came to talk to me and he said they went to India to a psychiatric hospital, and they had a psychiatric nurse with them who asked for all the admission files of all people in that psychiatric institute. Every single admission file said onset stress, onset stress, onset stress. Yep. So, very interesting. Next thing, next slide, please. So, who knows what that is? Chromosome, right? So, your chromosome, inside every single cell except your red blood cells, you've got chromosomes. The chromosome is where the DNA is all sort of shriveled up. It uncoils and eventually it splits up, and then from DNA you get RNA, and RNA forms proteins. So that's how that sort of system works. Now, if you click that again, at the top of your chromosomes, you've got on the tips, you've got little pieces of DNA that they call telomeres. Telomeres are what keeps your DNA stable. It keeps your chromosomes stable. So telomeres have been associated with chronological age. So basically, the longer your telomere, the younger you are. The shorter your telomere, the older you are. So the function of telomeres is to make sure that your DNA or your chromosome doesn't unravel. So some people say then that means as we age, we unravel. Right? The issue with telomeres is that there's an enzyme that helps to fix telomeres. It's called telomerase. And when you stress too much, telomerase is deactivated. So it cannot fix the telomeres. So what they've discovered is, and they actually won a Nobel Prize for this, is that they did a study on, for example, mothers who take care of kids who are severely disabled. And they found that their telomeres are on average shorter by 10 years, equivalent to mothers who are not taking care of kids who are severely disabled. What they've also discovered is the mothers who take care of kids who are disabled, but they've got good social networks, they've got faith, they've got all sorts of other support networks, they don't have the same impact. And so what they've realized is that there's a coping strategy that actually makes a difference in how people then biologically seem to cope with stress much better. Can you go to the next slide? I'll just keep on clicking. The next thing I want to quickly talk about is epigenetics. So epigenetics, how many of you have heard of epigenetics? So epigenetics basically means that your DNA doesn't change. It doesn't change your genetic code. It just changes how your DNA is read or interpreted by RNA. So if you think about a set of instructions, so let's say you've got a set of instructions for how to bake a cake, yeah, or make any kind of dish. So imagine somebody gives you the set of instructions, but they've used a black marker and they've blotted out some parts of those instructions. Does it change the instructions? No. But it changes how you read the instructions, and therefore the outcome is different. And the same happens here as well. So epigenetics is just a methylation that sits on the DNA, and all it does is it basically changes how RNA reads your DNA and therefore the protein that gets formed, and that leads to all sorts of other issues. So proteins are things like hormones, enzymes, muscle, etc. Those are proteins. So if the protein is read in the wrong way and it produces the wrong protein, then obviously there's a negative consequence for that as well, which is why stress is often associated with things like diabetes, etc., etc. It's an issue around the way that the proteins have been coded. The bad news is this can go from they've discovered that this can go all the way from the first to the second to the third to the fourth generation. Yeah, and so if I could give you an example of how that can happen, is imagine a mother who is pregnant. Inside is a baby girl. The baby girl already has all the egg cells that she needs to reproduce. So we got mother's first generation, baby girl second generation, egg cells third generation that give birth to the fourth generation. Can you click to the next slide? Next one. Next one. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes children for the sins of their fathers up to the third and the fourth generation. How do you think Moses knew this? What did Moses know about epigenetics? Now, if you look at, this is a bit theological now. So if you look at that verse, it says the sins of the parents. If you look at the translations of the Bible, and you go all the way to the sort of word-for-word translations versus the concept translations, you go all the way from, let's say, the KJV or the Tree of Life, and you go all the way to the Message Bible, and in the middle you've got sort of the NIV. That comes from the NIV. If you look at the Tree of Life version, the word-for-word versions, the word sin is actually, it's iniquities, which is immoral behaviors. So it's basically immoral behaviors that has a consequence to the next generation, or on the next generation, up to the third and the fourth generation. So it has a consequence. Rather than kids being punished for the sins of their fathers, it's a consequence. And that's what epigenetics really is. But then it carries on. If you go to the next click, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me. Good news about epigenetics is it's completely reversible as well. Right? And you reverse it by living in the right way, not drinking too much, not smoking too much, etc., exercising regularly, and that sort of stuff. So living right fixes the epigenetic problem. And they've done these studies a couple of times. So this is still all the bad news and a little bit of good news about stress, right? Next slide, please. Next problem we have is, how is stress defined? So people define, if you go and read through these research articles, they define stress in at least 3 different ways. The first way is they say stress is a stimulus. So stress is the thing that happens outside, and therefore that's stress. The second way they define it is they say stress is a response. Yeah, so it's the way you respond to whatever has happened. Now, I've got a problem with both of those, because we often see the same thing happen and people respond in different ways. So the thing that happens cannot be the stress, because people respond in different ways. So how many of you like skydiving? What? How many was it? 1, 2, 3. Okay. Yeah. So skydiving. So is skydiving stressful? Yes or no? For some of you, yeah. But for some of you, it might not be stressful. So if I say to you, you said you like skydiving. You said you like skydiving, right? What happens? What happens when you're in the plane and you know you're at the right? What height is it? Too high. What height is it? A couple of thousand feet, hey? It's high, right? So if you're there and you know that the door's about to open, you're about to jump out of the plane, hopefully with a parachute on. I mean, hopefully you weren't so excited that you forgot So imagine you're about to, what happens to your body? Adrenaline. So your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up, you get sweaty palms. Yeah? So if you're someone who doesn't like skydiving, and the door is about to open, you're about to dive out of the plane, what happens to your body? Same thing. So is stress the stimulus? No. Is stress the response? No. Because two different people respond the same way, different ways to the same thing, and then they've got the same physiological response, and that also doesn't explain stress. So when the researchers then become quite clever, and they say, oh, maybe it's an interaction between the two. But you can't take two wrong definitions and make a right definition. I mean, it doesn't work like that, does it? And so when I read all these articles that the scientists submit so they go through this peer review process before it goes to a journal. When they submit them, and I review them, I normally reject them because they haven't defined what stress really is. So you can see the problem with stress. All three of these definitions ignores the fact that there's individual variability. All three of them tries to find it either in the response or the things that happen or a combination of the two, but it doesn't say that actually I'm a human being. I can decide, I can think, etc., etc. Right? So it ignores that completely. Can you go to the next one? So in your body, you've got two systems. You've got the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system gets its name because it sympathizes with you. So when you're worked up about something, it responds in sympathy, and it produces adrenaline. If you're from the United States, it's called epinephrine. Yeah? And sometimes also noradrenaline. And that's very quick. It's immediate. So adrenaline is secreted by your nerve endings, and it's immediate. The response is pretty quick. But after you've run away I'm from Africa, so you've run away from a lion, just generally speaking, a pretty bad idea. And staring it down also doesn't work for me, right? So let's say you've run and the adrenaline kicks in and you run really fast, but never fast enough. Then when your body finished that response, it gets metabolized by your system very quickly after that. So adrenaline has no lasting effect. It's not a bad thing. The parasympathetic nervous system is the opposite of the sympathetic nervous system, and that's the one that helps you to relax. Right? So if you want to relax very quickly, what do you think is the best way to relax very quickly? Breathe, in or out? Out. Out. So breathe in. You've got to breathe in at some point. You can only breathe out up to a point, and then that's your last breath, right? So I've never heard of somebody take their last breath. People breathe out the last breath. So you've got to breathe in again. But generally what you've got to do is you've got to go breathe and then slowly out. So breathing out slowly is what activates your parasympathetic nervous system. That's the quickest way to cancel out the sympathetic nervous system, is to just breathe out. Yeah? Easy as that. It helps you to relax. It helps you to chill. It's the same as who's that? I had a whole bunch of students once going, who's, and then one of them they've been doing this for about 5 minutes. And they eventually, one brave guy goes, what are we doing this for? And I said, I don't know. You're just doing it because I told you to. That's pretty silly. So the parasympathetic nervous system is what helps you to relax, right? And so here's the interesting thing. They've done a study, and that's why there's a microphone up there. They've done a study, and one of the things that stresses people out the most is what I'm doing right now. Public speaking, right? It really freaks people out. To the point where I actually use public speaking to stress people out in a laboratory. Now, I can never, ever use any of you again, ever in a study, if I tell you what I tell you now, so it stays in this room, right? When I get people into a laboratory, if I want to get them worked up so I can measure their blood pressure and their heart rates and all that sort of stuff, I tell them to go and stand in that spot over there and speak to me. Like, just do it. I don't know. Just tell me a little bit about you. If I want to get them really worked up, I have another person in the room with me, and they've got to talk in front of the two of us. If I want to get them really freaked out, I have someone of the opposite sex with me. So if it's a guy, then I've got a girl. If it's a girl, I've got a guy standing next to me. If I really want to get them worked up, I wear a white lab coat. I don't know. It's scientifically proven. It's called the white lab coat effect. It freaks people out. So I don't know why they wear these things in hospitals. Like, here's the doctor. They shouldn't be doing that. What's going on? How are you feeling today? I don't know. Right? This is your final meal. So it's not, that's the white lab coat effect. If I really want to work them out, while they talk, I look at the person next to me and I go, what do you think? Bad. And that really pushes people over the edge. Do you know why? Because we're so hungry for being accepted. And so just showing people a little bit of, not so sure about you, pushes it up to there. That's why public speaking is so stressful as well. As we look around the room and we go, I wonder if I'm good enough. I wonder what they think about me. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you walk into a room with 100 people, there's probably, 25 will love you, 25% will go, oh, that was average. And the others will sort of go, oh, it's okay, it's cool. You just accept that. If you accept that, then everything is cool. Then you're fine with that. All right? So the other reason why I mentioned that is, then eventually when the researchers figured this out, they did a study and they said, okay, well, let's divide the room into two groups, kind of like here. All right? And they said, okay, well, this group here, we're going to teach you. So let's talk about fight or flight. All right. So this group over here, you're going to tell yourself, you're all going to do a speech, right? Not you. This is what they told the participants. Just, you can already, people are sort of avoiding eye. So this group here, in order for you to relax before you come and do a speech in front of all these other people, you're going to tell yourself to relax. So you tell yourself, relax, relax, relax. You tell yourself, I'm so excited about this. I'm pumped. Who do you think performed the best? Because they're excited. You know why that's important? Because what we often do is we try to relax by telling our parasympathetic system to override the sympathetic nervous system when we need the sympathetic nervous system to perform. Who here knows Usain Bolt? Okay, well, the wrong crowd there. But you know of Usain Bolt, right? He's a pretty fast guy, right? I wonder if he can outrun a cheetah. He can't even outrun a hippo, by the way. I think hippos are faster than Usain Bolt because they can't stop. Once they've built up momentum, they can't stop. So Usain Bolt, for example, you think about Usain Bolt. What does he do before he runs his Olympic race? Does he go... Does he do that? No. He jumps up and down, he's pumped up, he looks pretty arrogant as well. But you know why? Because he tells himself that he's excited. Because if he tells himself, oh, relax, 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 he's going to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which deactivates the adrenaline. And then what happens? He goes in the blocks, and he can't get away. Yeah? So we need the sympathetic nervous system. But what they have realized is if you tell yourself that you're excited instead of stressed, if you tell yourself to be excited instead of calming down, it's easier for you to align your emotions with your physiology. Because we need the physiology to respond to whatever demands we've got. So it simply is a case of saying, I'm actually excited about this. And it does change things quite a bit. Okay, next slide. So that's the first step. So your stress response happens in two sort of separate cascades in the system. The first system is the sympathetic parasympathetic system. The second one is, this is a long word, you can stick with HPAA, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Okay? So that system kicks into gear about 10 to 20 minutes after the sympathetic nervous system was activated. So there was some wisdom in the older generation when they said, when you get angry, count to 10. Because what you don't want is for this system to be activated unnecessarily. Adrenaline is secreted quickly, and it's metabolized quickly, and there's no long-lasting effect. The second system, the HPAA, starts off with the hypothalamus producing a hormone that's called CRH. It goes through a little blood vessel all the way to the bottom in the pituitary gland, which produces ACTH, and then it goes through your blood system all the way to the top of your kidneys. Next slide. To the top of your kidneys, where you've got your adrenal glands. And the adrenal glands produce something called cortisol. How many of you have heard the word cortisol? Cool. So if I say cortisol and I say adrenaline, up until now, you might have heard that those two things are stress hormones. Yep. I studied biochemistry. I have never seen a hormone under a microscope with a label that says stress hormone. We've given it that label. We've given it the label stress hormone. Cortisol is a hormone that is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It's not a stress hormone. So, for example, how many of you woke up this morning? Yeah? Good. There's a difference. I'm saying how many of you woke up this morning, because getting up is one thing. I've got 3 kids. When they were much younger, I used to get up in the morning. I wouldn't say I woke up in the morning. I just got up. And then caffeine did the rest. So how many of you woke up this morning? Cool. The reason why you wake up is because cortisol rises before you wake up. Does it mean you're stressed? No. It just means you're waking up. And cortisol keeps on rising throughout the day until about sort of 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then it starts going down again so that you can relax to go and sleep. So cortisol's function is actually to sustain our energy. That's what cortisol is supposed to do. Cortisol is not a stress hormone. It's actually more of an energy hormone. It helps us to sustain our energy. So what happens with cortisol also is, if we're continuously on a state of being stressed, not pressure, stress, cortisol stays up and it doesn't come down again. It just stays up. And when cortisol stays up for a long period of time, it actually tells your body that I have to do something because I am in danger. That's what it does. And so what happens is, because cortisol stays up and it tells your body to conserve energy, it takes away things that your body doesn't need to survive a life-threatening event, like running away from a lion, long distance. Running away from a cheetah, if you can make it, is pretty cool because they don't run very far. Wild dogs, good luck. They got a lot of stamina. So cortisol stays up, and then it suppresses your immune function. And when your immune function is suppressed, you start getting sick. So how many of you have had a cold, what do you call it in New Zealand, cold sores or fever blisters? You call it a cold sore? How many have had a cold sore? Not recently, like if you ever had one. Like, do you get it when you feel great? No, usually you get a cold sore when you feel stressed. That is a virus called herpes simplex virus, HSV. And when you get a cold sore, it's because your immune system is suppressed because of a high level of cortisol. And so there's, in the virus itself, as an example, in the virus itself, there's a piece of genetic material that picks up that your body has too much cortisol in it, and it tells your body to suppress your immune function even more, to produce more cortisol, to suppress your immune function more. So eventually this virus just goes, and it starts forming this cold sore. And then what do? You go to the what? Go to the pharmacist, and you get a little patch. You put the patch on, and miraculously it disappears, right? Patch did nothing. You started relaxing because you did something about it, and your immune system started working again, and it killed the virus. That's what happened. The patch does not. Any pharmacists in the room? I'm sorry about that. You can't kill a virus. A virus is dead. It's a piece of protein with some genetic material inside it. It's not alive. It's just, anyway, it's dead. You can't kill it. You can't revive it either. Cool. So another example is, many years ago, people believed that stomach ulcers are caused by stomach acid. So they go, I'll drink a little bit of milk to neutralize the acid, and it doesn't help. What they know now is, because your immune system is suppressed, there's a bacteria in there called Helicobacter pylori, and because your immune system is suppressed, the bacteria starts growing, it eats away your stomach walls, and it causes a stomach ulcer. So some places some doctors have actually prescribed antibiotics to deal with that until people learn to relax a bit more. Yeah? So all of these things that we thought as a medical reason is actually stress is one of the reasons for why people get this sort of issues, right? Next slide, please. So, next thing I want to quickly define for you is, when I go to companies, quite often they say to me, I want you to come and talk to our people about resilience. And I ask them, well, what do you mean by resilience? And often they'll say, well, we want our people to work harder, we want them to be more focused, we want our people to just have more energy. And so everything they describe to me is not resilience. What they describe to me is tenacity and endurance. And I think there's a misunderstanding that these 3 things are actually quite different. Tenacity is I'm going to do this. It's the commitment to get something done. Endurance is the ability to go the distance. And resilience is the recovery. So if you want your people to be more resilient, I can run 1 million resilient courses for them. What you need to do is find out a way to help them to find some time in their day to relax, because there is no resilience without a time to rest. Which is why that lion is, I don't know, I think lions rest and sleep about 80% of the time of the day, you know. And then when they wake up, they're awake, very awake. Cool, so I think there's a big difference between tenacity, endurance, and resilience. And resilient people, so there's no such thing as a resilient person and a non-resilient person. They are just people who have learned how to relax. Yeah, it's the same as athletes. So you can be more fit than you are right now. Yeah, you can be more fit than you are right now, because fitness is not about how far you can run. Fitness is about how quickly you recover after you've run a distance. Resilience and fitness is very similar. It's how quickly your blood pressure returns to normal, heart rate returns to normal. It's about resting. That's what resilience is all about. So as soon as we're clear about that, I think it'll solve a lot of our problems. It's the importance of rest. Next slide, please. By the seventh day, God finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he what? He did it. I'm just saying, right? If God did it, then probably not a bad idea for us to try and do the same. Right, we've got to rest. Next slide, please. So, if you want to do, I mean, there's lots of coping strategies, but if there are 3 things that you want to do to help you and your family and your friends and your colleagues to cope better with life, these are the 3 things. There's lots of other things, but these are the 3 things that come through consistently. So whether I look at research over the last 25 years, whether I look at age-old philosophy, whether I look at things that was written thousands of years ago, these are principles. They might have different names, but these are principles. So the first thing there is rumination and worry. I'm going to call them the same thing, rumination and worry. Rumination is a negative emotion. So rumination is when you add negative emotion to things that happen or didn't happen. I'll give an example of rumination. Imagine you go to work, so you had a rough morning, right? You got the kids up, you got the kids ready, toothbrush was missing, I don't know, I'm speaking from experience. Try to get them in the car, and then they fight about the car seats, who sits in the front, who sits in the back, and blah, whatever. Eventually you get to the school, you drop them off, you look back and you go, oh, they forgot their water. And then you go to work. And the day is busy, there's a lot to do. And someone walks into your office and they say something that just rubs you up in the wrong way. I don't know, give me an example of something people can say to you, like, what was that? Good morning. Oh, good morning. Like, actually, that's good, because I remember I had a colleague who walked, it was my first day at this company that I joined a couple of years ago, first day on the job, right? And this guy walks in, he comes and stands against the door like this, and he stands like this, and he says, hey. I said, good morning. He says, Immediately, his face went from a smile to a frown to, you're 50% correct. It's morning. And then he walked off. All right, so rumination. So imagine somebody says something to you, just rubs you up the wrong way. Maybe I don't know, maybe you went past McDonald's, you got yourself a cup of coffee and it spilled when you stopped at the traffic light because the in front of you didn't pull away when they should have, whatever. And you got this nice brown coffee stain somewhere, right? And it's new pants or new dress or whatever, right? So it's not a good day. And somebody walks in and they say, oh, you got a stain on your dress. And you go, oh, I don't know that. As if I didn't see that. And then they said, you really should check your clothes before you come to work. As an example, it could be something really simple. And you go, oh, whatever. And you walk off, and the day is busy, and eventually you get back, kids go back home, you got them fed, you got them into bed. Finally, it's 11 o'clock, you still finished up a little bit of work you needed to get done, you fire off the email, and you lay down on your bed, you're about to close your eyes, and suddenly they open up and go, whoa, that would have been such a good comeback. And then you think about all these things that you could have said, right? And next time this, and next time that, who dare they, blah, and you start thinking about all these things. And suddenly you can't sleep anymore, so now you're awake. Because your cortisol levels went like this, right? And that's rumination. And then suddenly you realize it's 1 o'clock in the morning. Now you're worried about the presentation you've got to do tomorrow. and you haven't slept yet. Now you're definitely not going to sleep. That's rumination. Rumination is thinking about the worst possible things that didn't happen or could happen or should have happened, blah, 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 blah. That's rumination. It's a horrible thing to do to ourselves, but I don't know why we do it, but we do it. Cool? And worry is very similar. So some people say that rumination is about the past and worry is about the future. The fact of the matter is they're all the same. I published an article in, I think, 2018 looking at rumination, ruminating about the past or the future. Which one do you think had the biggest predictive value for depression, anxiety, stress, physiological illnesses? Ruminating about the future or ruminating about the past? Future. Yeah? Because the past is done. There's nothing else you can do it. But sometimes people can't. And so how the past feeds into it, because it took very long to get that published because it kind of went against what Sigmund Freud said. Because Freud said it's all about the past. And suddenly we go, oh no, actually, it's people who are concerned about the future. So what happens is you ruminate about the future, concerned that the past might repeat itself again. So I saw this in Christchurch a lot. I was in Christchurch again last week. There's some people who are still concerned about earthquakes, mosque attacks, and all that sort of stuff, because it's not about the event that took place. It's about what if this happens again. We don't want to go through this again. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that people are concerned about. Perspective. Now, so rumination and worry, that's an emotional response. Not good for us. Raises cortisol levels. It raises blood pressure. And by the way, in your heart, you've got an artery that comes out the top here. What is that artery called? Aorta. Pretty big artery, right? So imagine a river. So what happens if water in a river goes around a corner or a bend very fast? It erodes it. So the same happens to your blood vessels as well, as when the blood goes around there very fast, high blood pressure, it erodes that epithelial cells inside there, and eventually it's got to build itself stronger, forms a little plaque, and eventually that comes loose and it goes into the smaller arteries, and that's what causes heart disease as well. So they thought it was cholesterol. Turns out the biggest reason for that is actually stress. Biggest cause for stress is rumination, right? It's the best predictor. Coping strategies. So rumination is something we shouldn't be doing. Coping strategies is perspective and something called detached coping. It's the same thing. So detached coping sounds cold and clinical. All it means is you see things in perspective. And then another way to cope with things is you change your behavior and your mental habits. So we all have habits. But if you change those habits, you change a lot of things, often for the better. Yep, so habits and cognitive habits, the way we think. So we all have a specific way of thinking. You might not know this, but we all have a specific way of thinking. And I think it might be the next slide, if you can drop to that one. This is perspective. I don't have to say too much about perspective, but there's a watch over there. And basically what it means is, do you live second by second, minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, month by month, or do you have a bigger perspective? In other words, how big a deal is the thing that we're dealing with right now 6 months from now? Yeah? If I have to ask you, what was the biggest thing in the news in August 2019? If I have to ask you, what was the biggest thing in the news in August 2019 that everybody spoke about? Mike Hosking, New Zealand Herald, you name a newspaper, it was on the front page. Close. It was that New Zealand will have 400,000 to 500,000 people get sick with the seasonal flu, not COVID, the seasonal flu. There will be 400 to 500 deaths. There are not enough vaccines and there are not enough beds. That was the biggest thing in the news in 2019. Got everybody worked up. And then soon after that, there was another piece of news. And then there was, mosque attack. And then there was it White Island? And then there was, so my point being is, if we live in that perspective of here and now, and we get freaked out and worried and concerned about this thing over here, we are constantly going to find something to be stressed about. Who lives in Auckland and heard the tsunami sirens a few weeks ago? I had people in my team pretty panicked about that. They didn't know what to do. Like, if I didn't mention that now, would it be one of the first things that comes to mind for you? No. So why was it such a big deal back then? You've got to see things in perspective. What is the perspective? Next slide, please. So, input, perspective, response. I'm going to show you that you've got a natural response for the way that you respond to things. So if I say those pencils there, a psychologist saw this picture on someone's Instagram feed and then sent me an email and said, "Oh, I really think we should talk. I think it seems like we're into the same thing." And I was like, "What are you into?" And he's like, "Color therapy." And I'm like, "Mate, I don't do color therapy." This is not what this represents, okay? So what it represents is colors that represent something. So if I say to you, think about the color green, think about the color green and then think about fruit. Fruit. What's the first thing that comes to mind? Apples, feijoas, grapes, kiwi fruit, watermelon, right? So you're thinking all about different things. I've given you exactly the same. I've given you the same color. I've given you the same perspective called fruit, and I had different responses. Why? Because all of you have a different neural network. You've got a different neural network based on how you grew up, what you're used to, blah. If you're from a Pacific island, you might go green fruit, banana. I don't know. Because that's how we naturally respond. So we call it the first response. It's the first way you respond about things. If I say red fruit, strawberry, apple, cherry, yeah? So I've given you what? I've given you a different input. I've given you the same perspective, but there's a different output. I've given you a different color. I've given you the same perspective. So the point here is sometimes if we have the same perspective, we have a different output for a different input. And sometimes if we have a different input, with a different perspective, we might have a different output. So we've got to sometimes change it. You can't change the inputs often, but you can change the perspective. If I change the perspective and I go back to green, and I say, instead of thinking about fruit, now think about emotion. What's the first thing that comes to mind? Jealousy, envy, sickness. Yeah. So I've given you the same input and a different perspective, and within the same person, I had two different responses. So what it means is we've got different responses from different people for the same input, same perspective, and then we get different responses within the same person with a different input and a different perspective, or the same input and a different perspective. Make sense? So what are we in control of? We're in control of the perspective. We can change the perspective, and we've got to do that. Next slide, please. So there are at least 4 levels of perspective. So quite often what people say to me is, okay, well, so I've got to think about things differently. So I'm going to think about perspective in terms of maybe the thing that I'm going through is not the biggest thing that there is to go through. Sounds like a good way to have a perspective, you know? If you're in COVID-19 and you're in lockdown and you sit in your house and you've got internet and you see there's a photograph on Facebook of a guy in some third world country who has to sit in the bath with a little tray on top to do whatever he needs to do, and the room is very small, you kind of go, wow, at least I've got this house. That person needs to sit in that sort of small bath, small apartment, no sanitation. Maybe my situation is not as bad. Yeah? So you can put things into that perspective. The trouble is, if you're going through the biggest thing that possibly is to go through, what are you going to compare that to? If you're the guy sitting in the bath, what do you compare that to? You know, what could possibly be worse than that? Somebody sitting outside? Like, I don't know. So what can you compare it to? Then you can compare it to eternity. You can think, well, maybe this is just a temporary thing. So in eternity, how big a deal is this? It's not a big deal. Eventually things will run its course. Nelson Mandela, for those of you who are in South Africa, was in lockdown for 27 years. I'm just saying, you know, we had a couple of weeks. He was 27 years on an island. No internet. No Zoom. Nothing. And he finished a degree. And what pulled him through? Purpose. He had a vision. Whether you agree with his politics or not, he had a vision that is bigger than the situation that he's in. The third thing is we can always see things in the perspective of an almighty God. A lot of people do this. Anybody who has a religion looks at things in the perspective of an almighty God. The trouble is, when you see things in the perspective of an almighty God, and it's a vengeful God, The research shows that people who believe in a vengeful God don't do very well in life because they feel very stressed, because they constantly have to ask for forgiveness. They constantly have to live up to expectations they simply cannot ever meet. One of the things that's quite unique about Christianity is there's an almighty loving God. So that's the fourth perspective. And within that perspective, what you can say is, well, this is a bad situation. What can I learn out of the situation? Whatever can happen, there will be something good that comes out of that as well. So there's at least four perspectives that we could use when we talk about perspective, to look at things in a completely different way. And sometimes it's not our perspective, it's another perspective we've got to throw into that. Next slide, please. Cast your cares on the Lord, and He will sustain you. He will never let the righteous be shaken. It doesn't say that the righteous won't be going through trouble. It just means you're not going to be shaken. Yeah? That's one verse, and there's so many. And we know that all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. So that for me is a really important thing. I'll show you, if we have time, I'll show you some slides later on with some statistics that people have done research on to show how important this is in the lives of people who have dealt with some pretty significant situations in their lives. It's a really important part of it, and we shouldn't underestimate it. Next slide, please. Who knows what that is? I don't know if you can see it. Wildebeest. Yeah. So, what are they doing? Migrating. Why are they migrating? Water, food. Why all the South Africans in New Zealand? I'm just saying, migrating. Lions are chasing you. The rugby team, or like, I don't know who you support, but anyway, so those are wildebeest, yes, and they migrating. They go from the Serengeti. They go through the Serengeti. There's this long. There's thousands of them, thousands and thousands. So the reason why I have that up there is because I'm going to talk a little bit about rumination. Now, wildebeest do ruminate, different to us, but because they've got four stomachs, it's a different kind of ruminate, right? But they don't ruminate in their heads. So if you think imagine this wildebeest walks through the Serengeti, and there still is grass, and they sort of walk, eat, and eventually they see sort of a movement in the grass. What do you think goes through its head when it sees a movement? Goes, I wonder what that is. Yeah, we go, lion, because we always think about the worst possible thing. The wildebeest looks at it and he goes, wonder what that is? Their eyesight is very good, so they stare very long. And I don't know if you've ever seen a wildebeest up close. It's a strange-looking animal. It's almost like there were some parts left behind. When everything was made, and it's like, well, there's a tail, there's a snout, some hooves, teeth. Wildebeest. Just put them together, right? I don't know. It's a strange-looking animal. And so they look at this thing and they kind of, I wonder if that's a lion, right? And so let's say it is a lion, and the lion starts chasing the wildebeest. And the wildebeest is running, and depending on the slant of the documentary, if it's Attenborough narrating it, then the music will play and it's dramatic when the wildebeest runs away from the lion, and it's all like idiot lion and blah, blah, blah. If it's about the lion, it's like, please catch the wildebeest and feed your cubs. You know, it just depends. And that's how they mess with us. So it's the same scene, they just put a different twist on it. Why? Perspective. It's a different perspective. So anyway, so the wildebeest is running away from the lion, and eventually the lion runs out of steam, and the wildebeest is standing under a tree. What do you think goes through his head? Got to get my breath back, yeah? So it's breathing heavily, and it's huffing and puffing, and it looks at the lion, and the lion is standing looking irritated and sort of slinks away in the grass. And then the wildebeest stands there and goes, whoa, this is good grass. And it carries on eating. What do? When we go, that was way too close. What if it caught me? What if it ate me alive? What about my insurance? What about my kids? What about we start thinking about all the stuff that didn't happen. The lion didn't catch you. Rumination is thinking about the worst things that could possibly happen. Wildebeest don't do that. They just move on to the next thing. That's why they don't get stomach ulcers, by the way. Just saying. Next slide, please. So here's a way to think about problems. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but this is a little formula that sits in my head. Is this a problem? Yes. If it's not a problem, is it not a problem? No. Can you do anything about it? Yes. Or no, what's the point of worrying about it? Like this formula runs through my head, I don't know how many times a day. So you can, I mean, people often ask me, they go, oh, you studied this stuff for so long, surely you don't get stressed anymore. It's like, yeah, I'm a human, last time I checked, which means I'm fallible, which means things get too much, which means I've got to find a way to deal with things. And that's one of the ways I deal with things. I kind of go, is this a problem? Cool. If it's a problem, I can deal with it. You know what the problem is between issues and problems? Problems other people can help you with. Issues is your problem. Right? Issues you've got to deal with. People who have issues need to deal with the issues. It's not somebody else's problem. There's a difference between the two. A problem is something that's external. An issue is when you internalize a problem. Only we can fix that. Next slide, please. Don't know if you can see that, but that's a rocking chair in a very dark room. And it's because it reminds me of a quote from a lady called Irma Brombeck, who had a very, very tough life. And she said that worry is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it doesn't get you anywhere. Right? And that's what worry does. Is we think. So I often ask people, what's the point of worry? And they say, well, worry helps me to deal with stuff. And I go, no, it doesn't. Because if you worry, you're just worrying about stuff. You're not doing anything about it. And so that's the issue with worry, is it just puts us in this rocking chair. And often we sit and rock in this dark room, and there's light on the outside. What we should be doing is get up and go and look outside and see what's going on. So the reason why I mention that is one of the best ways often to deal with things is to change our behavior. If we're going to struggle to change how we think about stuff, we've got to get up and do something else. We've got to behave ourselves into a new way of thinking. In fact, there's a book, if you're interested, there's a book called Tiny Habits. I haven't read it, but I've heard a lot of good stuff about it. But Tiny Habits basically boils down to do something small that's part of your daily routine, but different. And it could be something as simple as you swing your feet off the bed in the morning and go, it's going to be a great day, before you brush your teeth, right? And then you do something else and something else and something else. And eventually you've got all these little habits that you've built into your routine. And if you look back a year later, it's like, well, I've come a long way, right? You've got to behave ourselves differently. Next slide, please. Don't worry about that. Next one. Here's something interesting. There are 2 verses in the Bible that says, can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? Do you remember the slide I showed you with the telomeres? That worry is the same as rumination. It causes stress, it increases cortisol levels, and it shortens your telomeres, which means it shortens your life. Well, Matthew and Luke says exactly the same thing. In fact, those are the words of Jesus. It says, who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to your life? Yeah, so there's a lot of wisdom that comes from that. And then eventually the scientific results come around and it says, wow, actually these things are true. Yeah, pretty interesting, eh? Next slide, please. So another way to deal with the pressures we have is to have confidence. We've got to have confidence in the right way, though. So there's a difference between confidence and arrogance. There's some interesting research around confidence that basically means does this look confident if I walk like this? Nah. Does this look a bit more confident? Right, it's a 5 centimeter difference. There's some interesting research that shows if you walk up straight with confidence, your body produces serotonin. Serotonin increases the number of cortisol receptors in your brain. That's important because cortisol has a negative feedback loop. So imagine you've got 5 cortisol molecules. You obviously have more than, but imagine you've got 5 cortisol molecules in your body. The only way it shuts down is if it connects to the cortisol receptors in your brain. Imagine you've got 2 cortisol receptors, 5 cortisol molecules. How long does it take to shut that system down? Quite long. Now, confidence increases serotonin, increases cortisol receptors. So imagine now you've got 5 receptors and you've got 5 cortisol molecules. How quickly does it shut down? Much faster. So being confident is really, really important. And that's an easy thing to do. You can behave yourself. You can, instead of slumping, you can just walk in and say, yeah, okay, cool. One way to do this is between meetings. So my meetings are often back to back to back to back to back to back. So I've learned to take a break between those meetings and think about nothing, right? I finish this meeting, and then I go to the next meeting, and I don't think about anything in between. And I go into the next meeting, and I think about that meeting, not the previous meeting. Because if I have to think about, let's say, for example, that meeting didn't go according to plan. What do you think is going to be my behavior in this meeting over here? It's just not going to work, right? It's going to be an absolute waste of time. So that's a really important thing as well. Incidentally, talk about meetings. I did a lot of research on this thing called Avoidance Coping, and I worked for a company that had automatic lights that detects movement. So there was some research done on avoidance coping, and they made people sit on this chair that looks very much like that, and the chair could swivel. And what they've discovered is people who get stressed and are high in avoidance coping sit very, very still when they stress. That chair does not move. And then as soon as the stress is away, they start moving again, they swivel. I don't know if you know, but you swivel. So now we're sitting in this meeting at the office with the lights that switch off when there's no movement. And I have a bunch of people who I know are avoidance copers. And the meeting gets tense. And the lights go off every time. Basically, we were all left in the dark. So we were sitting there, and it gets a little bit tense. And I know what I know about this. So I'm sitting there going, I've got to keep a straight face, because this is an awkward moment to laugh in a meeting. It's a serious meeting, right? So every now and again, we just had to sort of wave our hands to get the lights back on again. So if ever you work in a place like that, now you know why the lights go off. It's tense. Cool, next one. There's a couple of verses over there that kind of gives us a reason for how to have confidence. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Once again, the research around this is very, very, very conclusive. As much as it talks about confidence, it also talks about what do we have confidence in. So there's an encyclopedia of medicine and religious research that summarizes all of this sort of stuff. If ever you're interested in that, there's so much research on this. It's so conclusive. I don't understand why people cannot believe this, because there's so much research around the topic. And just on that topic, by the way, there's a big difference between, it's really difficult to do research around religion versus faith and health, for example. One of the reasons is, how do you quantify things? This is one of the big issues in science, is how do we quantify things? So how do I quantify someone's faith? How do I quantify the power of a prayer? And in fact, and then the next thing is, how do I control all the variables? So if I pray, how do I control the fact that God's going to do something now, while I'm doing the experiment? So you can't always do this. But what you can do is, you can count certain religious behaviors, for example. So things like church attendance, how regularly and often people, for example, read the Bible and so forth. So you can count those sorts of things, and this is what a lot of this research is based on as well. Next slide as well. Next slide, please. So here's a really important word. It's called connectedness. This has nothing to do with connectivity, and it's got nothing to do with Facebook. It's got to do with how well we connect with other people in our communities. So I'll give you one example of how they got into this topic. Is they looked at people who are centenarians, people who turn 100, and they sort of thought, well, where do we find most people who turn 100? And they found two places, Italy and Japan, has most people who turn 100. And then they thought, well, maybe it's because they've got olives, maybe it's because they eat pizzas or pasta, or maybe it's because they drink sake. Nobody knew. Maybe it's because they walk quite often. And so they looked at what is the reason for these people getting so old. And the main reason was a thing called connectedness. And it basically is simple things like, if you have a local barista, there's a coffee shop you go to, it's just, how friendly are you with the barista? Do you know each other? You don't have to hang out with each other, but you know each other. One example they gave is an old man who, on a daily basis, walked to the local grocer. And at the grocer, he would buy his groceries for the evening, go back home, make his dinner, and so on. And one day, the grocer didn't see this guy come to his shop, which was pretty weird. I mean, they weren't friends, they didn't hang out, they were just sort of, customer and supplier. So his house was past this old man's house, and on the way home, he saw the door was open, and he looked inside, and the guy was on the floor, and he needed urgent medical attention. That's connectedness. So what they've discovered is connectedness is incredibly powerful for our resilience as well. It's about sharing. So the mothers with the telomeres who took care of kids who are severely disabled, one of the best coping mechanisms they had was connecting with other people and a sense of humor. All right? That was really powerful stuff. So next slide, please. And next one. So one of the things they've discovered is, let's say, for example, in church communities, so Connectedness could be your local tennis club, it could be a golf club, it could be a whole bunch of other clubs as well. But in church communities, what they've discovered is when people, not just church communities, but any music, where people play music together, sing together, and it's in harmony, oxytocin levels rises and ACTH levels drop. So ACTH is the hormone that is secreted in your brain before it becomes cortisol. So that drops when people sing or play music in harmony, and oxytocin goes up. Oxytocin is also called the trust hormone. Oxytocin is the hormone, it's also called the connection hormone. It's the hormone that is secreted after you've given birth that allows you to love your child despite the pain. That's oxytocin. That's what it does. It's that kind of hormone. So oxytocin is really good. There's some other interesting research as well that oxytocin, if you hug somebody for 20 seconds and your body starts producing oxytocin. So I have 2 daughters. If ever they have boyfriends, Daddy will be sitting there going, yeah, 19, time's up. There you go now. We're not going to build any trust over here, right? So that's what oxytocin does. It's a powerful hormone. Next slide, please. And then interestingly, the second is this: love your neighbor as yourself, and there's no commandment that's greater than these. Interesting, eh? Adam was alone. There was nothing else that was suitable partner for him, so God created another human being called Eve. That's how important connectedness is. It's the second commandment that's equal to the first commandment. So once again, it's these principles that just come all the way through, and then eventually we do the scientific research and we go, well, actually, the hormone that's all about connection actually rises when we do things together, when there's when there's connection. For where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there I am with them. Next slide, please. Now, imagine this triangle. People are standing at the bottom, and then at the top is God. So if you click, you'll see them, as these people move closer to God, they also move closer to each other. Yeah? And I think that's one of the things, is what is there that unifies people? Right now we've got a lot of stuff in the world that is starting to separate people rather than unify people. And we've got to find a way to unify people, because when you unify people, you create connectedness. When you create connectedness, you create healthier societies, healthier communities, healthier families. It's really important that we do that. And we've got to find a way to do this, some way or the other. I do a lot of work in prisons as well, and I'll tell you what, there's some stories that come out of there for why people are there in the first place. You know, there might have been gang activity, but the gang is not the reason why they're there. That's just how they got caught to get to where they are. It's not the reason. There's another reason for that. Next slide, please. So, another important way to cope with things is just accept that bad things will happen. You know, we kind of, very often people live in this world where we think nothing should go wrong. I guarantee you, if I have a crowd of 1,000 people sitting in front of me and I name 5 things that people can experience, and I say to people, if this or this or this or this or this happened to you in your life, please stand up, then everybody will get up. There is no such thing as a person without problems. It doesn't exist. I've never seen it. Otherwise, if they say they haven't got problems, either they've not done anything, or they need to go and see someone who can help them to realize that they actually do have problems, right? Everybody has some kind of an issue that we need to, that's part of being alive, you know. The only things that don't have problems are things that are dead. Because by definition, solving problems is what we've got to do. You know, whether they call it homeostasis, it's creating an equal balance in your body, that's solving a problem. So bad things happen because it's just, we've got to solve a balance. There's a balance that we've got to create, and things are out of whack, and we've got to put it back into whack again. So if we accept that bad things will happen, rather than avoid all the bad things, then we'll find a way to work our way through that as well. Next slide, please. The interesting thing is that Jesus said this: I have told you these things so that so that in me you may have peace, and in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. It's like, well, should it be surprising us that there are going to be problems in the world? Probably not. But anyway, that's what's in the Bible. Accept that bad things happen is what research is telling us more and more. People who accept that bad things happen seem to cope better with life. Next slide, please. Now, these things are important. So I've told you that rumination is not good for you. So now you might say, well, how do I not ruminate about stuff? And so here's the thing. Often what people do, and I get this with students as well who come and see me, they'll say, oh, I'm so stressed. And I go, yeah, that's what studying is about. Wait until you get into the real world. But that's not helping me, of course, right? It doesn't help them at all. But what I often say to them is, so what are you doing about the fact that you're stressed about something? And they'll say to me, oh, it doesn't matter how many times I tell myself to stop stressing, I cannot stop stressing. And I go, hang on. You're telling yourself to stop stressing. Like, how many times do you tell yourself that? So a couple of times. I go, don't stress. And it's not effective at all, because it's as good as telling yourself to not think about zebras with pink stripes. What are you thinking about now? Did you think about that before I said it? No. So telling ourselves to stop stressing is actually just telling ourselves the very thing, we're starting to think about the thing that we didn't want to think about in the first place. So now what they do is they go, relax. What are you telling yourself then? I'm still stressed. Right? So the more you tell yourself to relax, the more you still tell yourself that you're still stressed as well. So it's not effective. The two things that research shows that is most effective in dealing with rumination and worry is meditation. So meditation, and some people call it worship as well. So the opposite of rumination is meditation. Rumination is meditating about negative things, and rumination is meditating about negative things, and meditation is ruminating about positive things. The issue with meditation, and you might have heard all of this, so meditation, you hear things like mindfulness and blah, is the trouble is we're always mindful. Our minds are always full. We just need to decide what it's full of. Is it full of stuff that is beneficial or not? So the issue with meditation is you're imagining that you're something else, or you're imagining that you are somewhere else, and then when you get out of your meditative state, where are you? So right back where you were in the first place. So it only helps you to relax. It doesn't solve the problem at all. Next slide, please. Prayer has been shown to be an incredibly effective antidote for stress. Not my words, this is the research. If you click on the next one, because what prayer does is it actually combines meditation with seeing things in perspective. Because when you pray, you're praying in the presence of an almighty God, and you kind of go, look, this is big. I can't deal with this on my own. I need your help. And so that's why prayer is an incredibly powerful antidote for stress. It combines perspective, and it combines meditation into one thing to help see things in perspective as well. So it's a very, very powerful, and also if we have time, I'll show you some of the slides as well. Next slide, please. Next one. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts, minds. Now, that surpasses all understanding is a really, really important principle. Because if I have to say to you, for example, well, if you ask me to explain certain things about stress to you, I'm going to have to make some assumptions. I'm going to have to assume that you understand biochemistry, that you understand neuroscience, that you understand all of the stuff about the psychology. And if you don't, it'll be difficult for me to explain all of the detail, right? So when we sometimes ask God these questions, we're assuming that we understand everything the way He understands it. And we don't. And that's the perspective. And so what comes alongside that then is trust. We've got to have trust that all things will work together. And it doesn't make sense because it transcends all understanding. It's not something we necessarily can understand. It's just faith is not always understandable. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick summary of some of the results that I've seen in some of the research. So diastolic blood pressure. So when your heart pumps blood, it's called systolic, and when it relaxes, it's called diastolic. Systolic, diastolic. Now, diastolic blood pressure is a very good indicator of heart disease, stress, and so forth. If that stays high, it's not a good thing for you. So if your blood pressure in a resting state is high, you're not really resting, right? So it's not a good thing. So they've measured average diastolic blood pressure. Don't know if you can see this. That is low church attendance, low prayer, high church attendance, low prayer, low attendance, high prayer, high attendance, high prayer. Which blood pressure is the lowest? I don't know. That's a sample of 3,632 people, by the way. If you're interested in statistics, P is smaller than 0.001. That means that they are about 99.99% certain that this is not because of sampling error. It's pretty good, right? Next slide, please. We'll go through these pretty quick. This is cigarette smokers. I don't know if you're interested in that, but this is how many people who are low attendance, low prayer smoke versus high attendance, high prayer. Yeah? Why is that important? Because things like that is not necessarily healthy for us. And so often people say to me things like, oh, but there's no evidence that religion is good for your health. And it's like, well, it is. It is. Because for some of it is because you behave in a way that is good. So that is a good question. That's a good outcome. Right? You don't sleep around, you don't drink too much, you don't blah. It's good for your health. And then there's other stuff that we cannot explain. So why is prayer powerful? No one knows. We just see that it is. So it does have a good outcome. These studies are all published. You can go and look them up if you want. Handbook of Religion and Health. And those researchers who wrote this did what's called a systematic review. It's one of the most powerful research methods in medical research that they've used. So it's a really robust piece of research. Next one, please. This is hospital days for people with no religion, Jewish, non-traditional Christian, Catholic, Protestant, mainline Baptist, fundamentalists. Kind of speaks for itself, right? Hospital admissions. And once again, this is also, it's published. And then the next slide. This is an interesting interleukin 6 as an indicator of whether your immune system is active. So when that's high, it means you've got probably some kind of an inflammation going on in your body. And they've done the same as they looked at people across time. So they looked at the same bunch of people from 1986 until 1992. People who are almost never engaged with any religious services have higher 1 year to 2 months, once to twice a year, once to twice a month, and then once a week, obviously, seem to do better in terms of the immune function as well. So, once again, these are not my words. This is based on systematic reviews that other people have published, but it just gives you some indication, and this is just some studies. I mean, there's so many studies, and as I say, there's a whole encyclopedia that's written about, for example, religion and health, and it summarizes a whole bunch of interesting things that resonates with what we see in other research as well. Next slide. Then there's other things you can do. That's quite obvious. Like, so you can eat right, you can drink right, you can sleep well, you can exercise moderately. Posture, I already spoke about, and connectedness. Sleep well. How many hours should we sleep in a day? 9, 8. Yeah. So let's go with 8, because I can do the calculation with 8 quickly. If you sleep for 8 hours a day, by the time you're 75, you would have slept for 25 years. It's a third. It's a third of the day. Like 8 hours is a third of 24, which means 25 is a third of 75. Yeah. Does it mean you should be sleeping less? No. It just means that for the 2/3 of your life that you're actually awake, don't use it to stress about stuff. Use it constructively. You need the sleep. Use the rest of the time constructively, rather than stress does absolutely nothing for us. It does no good. And it lets you sleep less. We underestimate the value of sleep in recovering from stress. We underestimate the value of sleep for mental health as well. It's one of the leading reasons for why people have mental health challenges as well. It's very important to sleep. Next slide, please. What is that? It's an airplane cockpit, right? So imagine, for example, that you are the pilot and someone says to you, oh, there's fire on the wing. What do? You look at the wing. It's like, you're on your own? Parachute, right? So if you know that you're the pilot, you've got to land that plane safely with all the passengers safely as well, right? Do you focus on all the dials? What would you focus on? You focus on the very thing that is most important, right? So the whole principle of this is, When there's difficult things in our lives, we've got to focus on the priority areas. And I'll give you one example. So a few years ago, I needed to go and present a talk. I was away preparing for the talk, and I got a call from my wife saying, our boy doesn't look so good. He probably needs to go and see the doc. So I left, took him to the doc. We were there for 20 minutes. Doc says, you're going to hospital right now. I was a week in hospital. We didn't think about that in the morning. While he's in hospital, is it any good for me to start thinking about all the other things that I need to do? Should I be thinking about, I've got all these reports to do, I've got to do these performance reviews, I've got to do the blah, or should my attention be on him? Yeah, on him. So focus on priorities. If my job as a pilot is to land the plane safely with the passengers in that plane, my family, my team, whoever, it is most important to then focus on speed, height, and direction. The dials, that we can call that KPIs, we can call it other distractions, you can call that watching on Netflix, you can call it whatever you want to do. But it's not important to focus on those things when you've got to land your plane safely. So people who are resilient know how to focus and push away anything that is not important in the moment. Next slide. Peas in a pod. You see it's cut off from the stem. Reason why that slide is in there is if we are the peas in that pod, we can only grow if we are connected to a stem, connected to the ground, and there's enough nutrients in there. But sometimes what we've got is people keep watering it, they keep putting food in there, and you might actually know people like this in your own life as well, because it's not just about you, this is about people that you know, maybe people you work with, people in your families. So quite often we try to force people to grow in the difficult situations that they're going through. But we can't. What we can do is we can give them nutrients, we can make sure that there's enough water, but it's up to them to grow. It's up to us to support them, it's up to them to do the growing, not us. And the reason why I mention that is, if you have people in your life who are going through difficulties, there's a big difference between empathy and sympathy, and look after yourself while you're looking after them as well. Don't try to solve the problems for them, because that could just get you worked up even more, and that's no good for anybody. So if you understand that they've got to do the growing, and Stephen Covey, I don't know if you know Stephen Covey. Know Stephen Covey? So Stephen Covey was a sort of leadership expert. He's the guy who wrote the book called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So I think he's dead now. But he used to run this workshop with a whole bunch of leaders coming into a building, and then he would say to them, so, I want you to grow a world-class tomato. So imagine you've got Fortune 500 chief executives sitting in a building, they've paid a couple of $1,000s for this, and Stephen Covey says, I want you to grow a world-class tomato. What do you think goes through their minds? Get a life, right? Anyway, so then they get busy in groups and they start planning the supply chain, the funding, all of those bits and pieces, right? And after they've done all of this, Stephen Covey goes around and says, that's really good, it's amazing, it's fantastic. I mean, these are chief executives of very successful companies. And he looks at what they've done and it's really good. And then he says, the following question that he asks them is, raise your hand if you can guarantee me that that will be a world-class tomato. How many hands went up? None. Because they realize that regardless of all the effort they've put in, the growth sits in the seed. The will to grow sits in the seed, and that's why this is important. We've got to think about exactly the same thing as we can nurture people, the growth sits in them. They've got to make the call. But here's the thing, the same is true for us. And so this is the part that I'm passionate about, is when I say I want people to be the best they can possibly be, and they sit in front of me and I help someone through a situation, I don't just see them getting better, I see them and 10 other people that they can help. Because I think that's really powerful, that's really important. That's the kind of thing that really gets me excited and ticking, is if I can see. Now, if you want to ask me what gives me a lump in my throat, is if I see one person that I've helped, and eventually I see them helping someone else and get happy about that. That is like, whoa, I mean, that really gets me, that fires me up, big time. Next slide, please. Now, when people talk to me about stress, very often they say, I'm so stressed, I'm blah, and we talk about these things that they call that they say they're stressed about. And what I realized then is they're actually not stressed, they're just frustrated. And it looks like the same thing. Blood pressure goes up, heart rate goes up, it seems like the same thing, but they're actually frustrated. And so they're frustrated because they're not satisfied. And they try to find satisfaction through things they do in their body. They try to find happiness through things they do with their minds, and they try to find joy through things that they do for their soul, but they lack fulfillment. The trouble is, fulfillment you only get when you find your purpose or when you do what's in line with your purpose. And quite often that's what happens, is people are not doing what is their purpose, and therefore they don't feel fulfilled. And they get frustrated about that. Next slide, please. There's only one way to find fulfillment. In your body is satisfaction. You can go for a run. It's going to make you feel better, but it's temporary. You can go and do a mindfulness retreat. It's going to make you feel a little bit better for a while. You can do something that's going to make you joyful. Next, click. When you do what is aligned with the gifts that you've been given, that's when you start finding fulfillment. So fulfillment is not something you find in anything. Fulfillment is something you find when. It's a when you do things that align with your purpose. When you do things that align with and you might find that you will be able to put up with a lot more than you think you can when you're just frustrated. Next slide, please. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. And you can go, oh, this is a Christian thing, but it's actually not just a Christian thing. All over the world we see that people who do things that are meaningful to other people as well as meaningful to them, and they simply seem to be doing better in life. For some reason, you can go and look. In every culture, you'll see people who do good things for other people. Even Viktor Frankl, in the concentration camp, it was that purpose that got him through the whole thing. Next slide, please. Next slide. It's just more of the same. So here's a question I ask myself quite often, when things get tough. Is what I'm thinking, feeling, and doing helping me or anybody else in any way? And if it's not, then it's a pointless waste of a thought, a feeling, or a behavior. Yeah, so the next question is, so what will I think, what will I feel, and what will I do that will be helpful for me and for other people? And importantly, go and do it. It's one thing to think it, but you've got to go and do it. And you might find that actually helps quite a lot, right? Next slide. Asking questions are really important, right? It changes what we think, it changes what we feel, it changes what we do. So a new question leads to a new thought, leads to a new emotion, leads to a new behavior, leads to a new outcome, leads to a new consequence. Yeah, think about that. Here's an example of a guy, Japanese soldier in the Philippines in, one of the wars. I can't remember, hero somebody. He got stuck on that island, and he believed the war was still going on. For almost 30 years, I think it was 20 years or 30 years, he was stuck on that island, and he wouldn't get off that island because he was waging a war that didn't exist, and we do the same thing. The reason why is he asked the wrong question. His question was, why have I not received an order from my superiors telling me that the war is over? And so he got stuck on the island. If you ask the question differently, next question please, or next slide, he would have come to a different conclusion. So here's some questions that are not good for us. What have I done wrong to deserve this? Why did they do this to me? Why did God allow this? Why did God do this? Next slide. Now, if you compare these questions to the previous questions, what do you think will be the outcome in terms of how you think about stuff? Instead of saying, maybe we can go, well, what can God do with this? Not why did he do this? What can he do with this? What can God do through this? What can God do through me in this because of this? If you ask those sorts of questions, it changes how you think about stuff, changes how you feel about it, and changes what you do, and it changes the consequences and the outcomes as well. So it's really positive to think this way. This is not positive thinking. This is purpose thinking. It's a big difference between the two. Positive thinking is just positive thinking. This is purpose thinking. Okay, next slide, please. And I know we're running out of time. If you want to do things right, CUP, communication, unrealistic expectations, power play. These are the three things that if you do them, then there will be issues between you and other people. And the reason why I mention it is because we are relational beings. And so one of the main reasons why we get worked up and stressed is because of other people. And one of the main reasons why other people get worked up and stressed is because of us. So communication is really important. Unrealistic expectations and power play normally doesn't work well. So the golden rule is treat other people the way you would like to be treated. The platinum rule is treat people the way they would like to be treated. Yeah? And I've never seen I've never met anybody for whom these three things, acceptance, respect, and appreciation, is not important. Everybody wants this. Everybody wants acceptance, respect, and appreciation. If you think about that, if you think about the time when somebody maybe offended you, when you got angry about something, if you really think about it, at some level you probably didn't feel respected, you probably didn't feel accepted, and you probably didn't feel appreciated. Yeah? If you're a parent, one of the reasons you get annoyed with your kids sometimes, despite the fact that you love them very much, is quite often you go, oh, really? Did you see how much I was working for you today? Yeah? It's appreciation, acceptance, and respect. It's quite often why we feel sad, why we feel angry, and so forth. Next slide, please. That's an acronym. I don't know if you've seen this before. OR is ownership, accountability, responsibility. So people who take ownership, accountability, and responsibility, generally speaking, do well in life. The opposite of that is bed, blame, excuse, and deny. Yeah, don't do so well in life. I can't remember who came up with that, but I always think it's pretty good. They call it above the line thinking, below the line thinking. Next slide. So, you've got to think about the tools that you've got in your toolbox. Yeah, because resilience is all about, it's not a personality, resilience is all about what do I put in place to make things happen. So here's three little things you can think about. I believe that there are building tools, there are maintenance tools, and then there are repair tools. The building tools is what are the things that I'm doing that helps me to get better. The maintenance tools are what are the things I do to recover and relax. And then the repair tools is what we don't actually want to use, but sometimes we've got to use it. This is when you've got to go and see a medical professional. It's when you've got to go and see a psychologist, a psychiatrist. Those are repair tools. So think about the things that you've got at your disposal when the time comes, or if the time comes. We've got to think about this. There aren't specifics to this, because for everybody it's so different. So if you think about what are my building tools, what are my maintenance tools, and what are my recovery tools? That would be a really good thing for you maybe to go and sit down and write these things out and just think about those. Next slide, please. How much time do we have? 1 minute. I think there's a little bit of space. And I want to quickly do a little bit of an exercise because this is all about relationships. So can the strongest person, can you please raise your right hand? I solemnly swear. I'm just raise your right hand if you're the strongest person. Put it sort of in front of you like this. And if you're the other person, make a fist with your right hand. And if the person with the fist, put your fist in the other person's palm. And the person with the fist, I want you to push as hard as you possibly can. Just keep on pushing. Keep on pushing. Push, 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 push. All right, you can stop, you can stop, you can stop. Okay, and you can sit down as well if you want. So I know it's late at night. So following instructions could be a little bit difficult. But what was my instruction? What was my instruction? Who should push? The person with the fist should push. What did the other person do? Push back. Communication, unrealistic expectations, power play. Right? It's human behavior. That's what we all do. I do this with thousands of people. It's a miracle there's still people in New Zealand I haven't done this with, but thank goodness. But I see it in all people do this. It's human nature. Somebody pushes, you push back, right? That's what we do. Can I have a volunteer? Who's nodding? Your hand was up pretty quick. Was it because you didn't want me to pick on you? All right, Puma. So for argument's sake, we're going to pretend that I'm the strong person, you're the other one. So you're going to put your fist in there and you're going to just keep on pushing. Just keep on pushing. Just keep on pushing. So what am I doing now? Thank you very much. What's your name?
Darren.
Darren. Thank you, Darren. So what did I do with Darren now? Control them. We had a conversation. So imagine that's a conversation. You're leading somebody through a conversation. So instead of this is what I want, this is what you want, this is what I want, this is what you want, that causes what? Stress, relationship breakdown, all sorts of other things. Suddenly we go, hang on, let's talk about this. I want to go
there and you want to go there. And so what we're doing is we're pushing like this and we're not going anywhere. But through this conversation, I could maybe hear something that Darren was saying that I would not think of or see from his perspective. Think about the pencils. Suddenly I see things from his perspective. And it's really important that we have that conversation, because often in organizations, so I work in leadership roles and I work with lots of leadership teams, what I can see is that they have this going on between themselves, but also with their teams, and you see the same thing in families. And what they do is they're talking about the facts, and they're not talking about the perspectives. But if Darren and I have a conversation about, but it's fact, this is truth, this is blah, but instead of that, we talk about, well, hang on, where are you from? How did you get here? We build a relationship, we talk about it. He could see where I want to go, I could see where he's coming from, and maybe we get to a point that's actually better for both of us. But it's not where either of us want it to be. You know what I mean? So I think that's what that exercise is all about, is how do we understand and communicate with each other. Next slide, I think that's the last one. Yes, the silver fern. Don't know how many of you know that, but the silver fern, the Maori warriors back in the days used to put the silver fern upside down, with the silver side reflecting light. So at night, people following them would have a torch, and it would reflect, and they would know where to go. So I'm appealing to you. You've heard some stuff tonight, you've learned some stuff tonight. My only wish and expectation, and if I can ask you to, is to go and lay down some silver ferns for other people, the people in your lives, people you work with, people in your family, friends, whatever. Go lay down some silver ferns for them to follow, to learn from you and the things that you know, so that we can build that better society that we're all looking for. Because stress is just a pointless waste of energy. There's so much more we can do to make the world a better place, but it's up to each and every one of us to share that with people as well. Thank you very much for your time. Really enjoyed being with you.
We've got 2 books to give away.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lehan, and it's been really good. And you're going to be having a coffee.
I'll
So
be having
you'll be in the
coffee.
coffee room if
Yeah.
you want to catch up with them and have a bit of a coffee.